Well, I was thinking this week, our dog is kind of getting old and getting a little gray muzzle, and made me think of the inevitability of pets passing on and getting a new pet. I remember when I was a kid, we had 2 dogs and a cat, and all 3 of the animals were claimed by my siblings, so whenever I tried to cozy up to them, my brothers or my sister would say, leave that dog alone. That's my dog. That's my cat. I kept telling my mother I wanted a pet of my own, and she kept resisting, not wanting to tend another pet. But then, fortunately, in the 4th grade, I contracted a serious illness that our family doctor, Dr. Curtley, couldn't diagnose, that had never been seen, some exotic, mysterious disease that had never been seen in Danville, brought to our town, according to Dr. Curtley, by a carnival worker. The carnival came to Danville every July, set up on the town square, and anything bad that happened while they were in town and in the months that followed was laid at their feet. Thefts, disturbances of every sort, fires, disease. One time a woman in our town ran off with a carnival worker and then returned to Danville in a family way and gave birth to a little carny baby who emerged from the womb sporting a tattoo, smoking a Marlboro. That's how we knew it was the offspring of a carnival worker. So there I was, near death, my mom hovering over me, and she asked, "What can I get you?" And I, in a weakened voice, said, "A pet." She got her purse, climbed in our pea green 1969 Plymouth Valiant, and drove to Danner's 5 and Dime on the town square, returning home with a cage and 2 gerbils, which she named Romulus and Remus, the mythical founders of Rome. I had never heard those names, not being a student of Roman mythology, but we had a set of World Book encyclopedias, so I looked up Romulus and Remus and was shocked to discover they were considered gods. What in the world was my Catholic mother thinking, naming our gerbils after pagan gods? Had she lost her mind? I kept reading the World Book Encyclopedia and discovered there were other historical figures thought to be divine: Egyptian pharaohs, Chinese and Japanese emperors, Julius Caesar, Homer, Alexander the Great, and Mary, mother of Jesus, just to name a few. I read their names aloud to my parents, and my father said, "Don't forget Babe Ruth," and so him too. Up until then, I thought Jesus had the divine market all to himself. I'd had no idea that humankind had been in the God-making business since our earliest days, all the way back, we think, to Ishtar of Mesopotamia, the goddess of love and war. Those two often feel a lot alike. Ishtar of Mesopotamia, goddess of love and war, the first deity for whom we have written evidence. Isn't theology fascinating? We've been talking about the importance of good theology, that the antidote to bad theology is good theology. We remember the words of Bishop Spong, who said there's not conservative theology or liberal theology, there's only bad theology and good theology. Bad theology, we know, gives birth to many cultural disorders, including Christian nationalism, this toxic mix of partisan politics, white supremacy, and evangelical Christianity, a movement many in our nation seem eager to embrace. We spent the past 2 weeks reflecting on the nature of God, so today I invite us to consider Jesus, and more specifically, to consider how Jesus became God and why. When I say Jesus became God, what I mean to say is that the divinity of Jesus was a human invention. That as a first century monotheistic Jew, Jesus would have likely rejected any claim to divinity. It would have just been outside his wheelhouse. It wouldn't have occurred to him. We see hints of this in the Bible. Once in Luke's gospel, when a religious leader called Jesus good teacher, and Jesus replied, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. Time and again, we see in his humility and humanity and unwillingness to elevate himself. Jesus was not a narcissist demanding worship. He was a servant, inviting others to serve with him. But because we are exceptionally good God makers, we promoted Jesus from teacher to God in the centuries following his death, until formally defining his nature at the Council of Nicaea, which was held in 325 AD, oddly enough by voting on it, about whether or not Jesus was divine. We took a vote on it. It was almost though inevitable that this would happen, given our propensity for elevating our heroes. In Jesus' lifetime and in the centuries following, the Roman Empire and their divine emperor had a powerful grip on Israel and the surrounding nations. The early church refuted Caesar's claim of divinity, chiefly by elevating Jesus. It was an early example of sticking it to the man. As you can imagine, this was not warmly embraced by Rome, and Christians were persecuted until gaining political favor under the Emperor Constantine, who made Christianity the state religion, an event we welcomed, but now must surely regret, not realizing it would one day lead to televangelism and Ted Cruz. So this is what happens. But we are exceptionally good God makers. We want to pay homage to those persons whose lives have been meaningful to us. So we grant them divine status. It's our way of saying someone embodies the finest virtues we can imagine. When the early church claimed Jesus was divine, they were saying the priorities and values of Jesus exemplified the priorities and values of God. John Dominic Crossan said, if God were to take on human form, Jesus is what it would look like. That's what the early church was saying, that if God were to take on human form, Jesus is what it would look like. And then over time, that just became a whole theology built up and added to. For the early church, it was not enough to say that Jesus was a good person. They wanted him to be a good God. While I understand that, I regret that it has devalued the intrinsic value of what it means to be human. So now we have this lopsided equation where humanity resides on a lower plane than divinity. And I believe that's contrary to the message and work of Jesus, who I believe had a high regard for humanity and is not honored by our diminishment. For Jesus to be good, it does not follow that humans must be bad. It simply does not follow. But I think there's another reason we create gods, and it's this. that just as soon as we elevate someone to divine status, we give ourselves an excuse not to be like them. Oh, I could never be like Jesus. He's God after all. Even though Jesus seemed to clearly expect his followers to do what he did and live like he did. Indeed, he told them they would do even greater things than he had done. That doesn't sound like a God to me. That sounds like a man with a high regard for human potential. We don't honor Jesus by making him God, by crowning him king and installing him as the head of the state religion, thereby investing his followers with worldly power and forcing him and ourselves upon others. We honor Jesus when we live as he lived, when we heal, when we have good news for the poor, when we love the outsider, when we lift up the oppressed, when we embrace our enemies, when we set the prisoners free. Jesus is never elevated by our words. Jesus is elevated by our actions, by our steadfast determination to do what he did with glad and joyful hearts. So 62 years I've been trying to figure out who I want to be. And this week I am pleased to report I discovered it. On YouTube of all places, an elderly Japanese man who builds houses in the old custom of fitting the pieces together through intricate joinery and not nails. And he begins each lesson by doing this. He has no idea who will watch his videos, but nevertheless, he bows in respect. He concludes each lesson the same way. A humble, gracious bow. I am so tired of categories that compel me to bow to some but not to others. So this week, let us see only humanity, and let us find within ourselves the capacity to honor everyone we encounter, knowing that they, like us, are on a journey not yet finished. Let's bow together, friends.